Minister.
Your thoughts on that, very welcome, of course. You can email us, hello@whitehallsources.com. This is the sort of insight that we intend to provide once a week. That's the plan. I keep saying it. This could be the week that happens where we don't have to do emergency add-in episodes. But what you should do is follow, subscribe, be part of this podcast so that if there's an emergency, you will get this podcast right there and you will get Kirsty and Oscar's analysis in your feed. And if not, then next Thursday is the day. That's how it works. It's lovely to be here with you. Email anytime, hello@whitehallsources.com. And that possibly then neatly brings us to the next section of the podcast this week, where I want to just understand the art of a reshuffle. I think that's something important to consider because it is such a big moment. This week I sat on the sofa just over there. I had a bottle of wine and was watching the reshuffle unfold. It was a great day for political nerds everywhere. Does anybody else do that, or is it just me that gets the wine and chocolate?
We all just sit there for hours and hours watching a door and occasionally somebody bibbling up the street, smiling, and then bibbling out again. I mean, it is the most nerdy thing, and only political nerds do it, as far as I know. But,
Gavin Williamson storming up the road. That was a highlight.
Oh, that was just Calum. You literally took that. That was without a doubt the best ever entrance to a cabinet.
I'm back, babies.
Just out the mist. It was so poetic.
I thought he was taking his tarantula for a walk.
Yeah, he would have loved that as well.
Or the face on Penny Mordaunt, who clearly briefed and pitched for Foreign Secretary and emerged with exactly the same job she had after overplaying her hand in the leadership contest.
Oh, she made such an error, didn't I thought, Kirsty? Such an error. If she had just, but basically around the time Boris did, if she had said, this isn't going to happen actually ultimately, Rishi, it's yours, then she would have a top job now.
Speaking of expending political capital, that was something that I still didn't get my head round. But in the aftermath of her not dropping out until 2 minutes before the deadline, I didn't understand that messaging from her campaign all morning on Monday morning was, "We're going to make it, we're going to do it, it's going to be fine."
Well, this is something we'll explore in deeper depth when we talk more about the reshuffle. But the thing with reshuffles is they're all starting from a premise of how much power do you have. And the first reshuffle you have as an incoming Prime Minister, it's been said quite a lot over the last couple of days, but it's true and bears repeating, you never have more power than that first reshuffle. And given all the momentum was behind Rishi in the leadership contest, I think given the fact that Penny could have pulled out in the name of unity and chose to take it to the wire, I think, and given the fact that some in her team were clearly briefing that she was going to get the Foreign Secretary's job, I think that just caused a need to have a bit of a muscle flex by number 10 there and say, no, we are in charge and you will stay serving at the will of the Prime Minister as leader of the House of Commons.
Gosh, what a week. Let's take it back to how a reshuffle starts. Now, clearly this is a slightly different circumstance in that it's a brand new Prime Minister, and so it's kind of almost the first thing he does. But by how it starts, I mean, what do you do? Just take us into the room where a reshuffle discussion begins in earnest. Is it a case, for example, of having pictures on the wall of who the current cabinet is and are?
So quite fantastically, in that sort of brilliant kind of 19th century British democracy way, you'd think you'd have some... I mean, you look at Channel 4 during an election and you've got Jon Snow zipping around with an interactive map and you've got this and if I do this and all the benches go blue and the benches go red and it's all very high tech. What do we have at the heart of government for a reshuffle? We have a whiteboard.
It's a little disappointing.
I kid you not. There is a whiteboard and some sticky notes and some, quite literally, leader, Foreign Secretary, blah, 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 blah. And people put names and put sticky notes on it so you can move your sticky notes as discussions go on. And then obviously it's a very tight, small circle of people that input into that. But feeding out from that, if you like, is a sort of slightly internal lobbying campaign where, people, wider the wider net in Downing Street try and go, oh, well, I think blah, blah, blah. And then, departmental people try and feed into. So it kind of, it spills out a bit. But in essence, there's a very small amount of people in the rooms, usually, probably the Prime Minister, the Chief Whip, Chief of Staff, Deputy, probably the party chairman. They are in the driving seat of that. And it's their decisions sort of first and foremost.
Okay, that's how it starts. And so in terms of the kind of input and from where it goes from there, because this is it's a total chess game, isn't it? Because there's an extent to which if you want somebody in one role and then they don't want it, then you have to move it. So at what point, Oscar, do you then approach somebody and say, oh, we fancy you in this place?
Well, as Kirsty rightly said, it is so tightly knit, and obviously the kind of the comms function, I think, are of Number 10 are consulted on these things. And ultimately, as well as being consulted, they then have to go and sell it once the decisions have been made. But it is very tightly closed, but tightly held. But obviously, the reshuffle that I was around was, when we talk about your most powerful, with your first reshuffle, that was very much not the case with Boris's last reshuffle. It was, well, his second to last reshuffle, because then we formed a kind of a some people called it zombie government in the media across the summer. But that was completely and utterly traumatically difficult, I would say, because you have to remember, and I'll be really brief, but just to rewind a little bit, I remember a lot of people have been taking hits on the media around Boris Johnson. And we then decided that Boris had to get in front of Chris Mason and front up the issues of the day. And we did the interview with Chris Mason. I go to the director of comms office. We sit back.
We do love Chris Mason.
Kirsty made a little heart, yeah.
I think it was for Chris Mason, wasn't it, Kirsty, that you were holding up your heart? It was indeed,
because we heart Chris Mason.
We do heart Chris Mason, even in those very dark days. And we're watching the interview and we're going, yeah, this is going pretty well. And then across the bottom of the screen, Chancellor, Health Secretary both resigned from government. And at that moment, so it wasn't a planned reshuffle. It was just absolute panic stations. And I won't say her name because I don't know how comfortable we should be with that. But, the press secretary at the time, it was heroic watching what she did in terms of how she leapt into action. And actually the press function becomes very important then, because we actually had to sell the idea. And it wasn't really a hard sell. We genuinely felt this, didn't prove to be the case, that with Nadine Zahawi coming in as Chancellor and Steve Barclay going into health, we were actually in a better place than we were 24 hours previously. They were more akin to what we wanted to do as a government. But to your point, the initial question, Calum, sorry for going on a bit of a tangent.
No, it's really interesting to get that. That's why we're here, is to get that insight. So
how that then all filters down in the game of chess to other departments and the MPs that feel loyal to those secretaries of state. So it's kind of two levels of chess as well. You're not just moving about the secretaries of state and ministers, you're also moving about their loyalists on the back benches. And although we could sell it to ourselves, we could almost sell it to the media, we could not sell it to those backbenchers that we were in a stronger position from that enforced reshuffle.
Mm-hmm. Kirsty, what reshuffle lives in your memory from your time in Number 10?
Well, just listening to Oscar, it's almost sweet to think about the botched reshuffles of old, of which there are many, because I'm not entirely sure that you can call what happened at the end of the Boris days a reshuffle. It was just a sort of multiple pile-up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so just to go back to the process. So you've got your whiteboard, you've got all your little sticky notes in the right place and what have you. And then on the day, what tends to happen is people who are going to be fired are invited to see the Prime Minister in his office in the House of Commons. So it's a courtesy thing. They don't have to have that kind of orcs walk up Downing Street, come out and go, what have you got? I've been fired. So,
parade past the media.
Precisely.
And on days like that, there are hundreds, worth highlight, there are hundreds of journalists, cameras, photographers, annoying radio people like me hustling for a position. There are hundreds of people there ready to scream at anybody who walks out or in or out of the door.
Yeah. So if you're getting invited in to see the Prime Minister in his Commons office on reshuffle day, you're about to be handed the pole-handled revolver and a stiff whiskey. So fine. And then the Prime Minister leaves, having done all the thank you but conversations, and then goes back to number 10 to invite people in to debate. Now, I mean, every circumstance is different. Sometimes, obviously, you'd have had some kind of initial. The Chief Whip probably would have had some initial soundings out. With Team Rishi, there were no jobs. I understand no jobs were offered during the leadership contest, so everybody would have been coming at this blind. Although there was obviously an expectation that to stabilise the markets, Jeremy Hunt would be staying on as Chancellor. But apart from that, I think everybody thought everything was kind of up for grabs. But how you handle a reshuffle entirely depends on your position of strength, if you like, at the time with which you do it, which brings me neatly to January 2018, post-2017 general election, from which Theresa May never was in a position of strength within the parliamentary party. And we had carefully constructed the whiteboard and the reshuffle and what have you, and the whole thing came to a screeching halt because one of the first appointments we wanted was to move the then Education Secretary Justine Greening to DWP. Now, Justine Greening is a great social justice campaigner, and I think there was an understanding or a thought process at number 10 that she would actually quite like this job because DWP would allow you to sort of expand on your social justice campaigning work. She refused to move. And in essence, she kind of sort of hunkered down in number 10 for like 2 hours. And because reshuffles are like, chess pieces on a board, you can't, until you've moved one person that frees up, you can't move the next. It's a sort of sequential thing. And so what should have been kind of done and dusted in a well-oiled kind of reshuffle in a few hours ended up in a sort of bit of a pile up because she wouldn't move, and in the end she quit. And Jeremy Hunt, who aforementioned Jeremy Hunt, he also wouldn't move. We wanted to move him to Bays, and he wanted to stay.
Bays is business.
I beg your pardon. Yes,
that's all right.
Department of Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy. So he wanted to move to Bays. He wouldn't move. He wanted to stay at the Department of Health, and he wanted to change the name of the Department of Health and bolt it on and make it a bigger kind of portfolio where it focused on social care as well. So we are now running very, very far behind on our well-oiled reshuffle, which the media obviously have noticed. And then I think this story's been reported, so I don't think I'm talking out of turn. I think Brandon Lewis had been called to number 10, and he was already in the car on the way up there, and he's thinking, I wonder what I might be getting. Maybe I'll be getting party chairman. And he looked at his phone just to see an announcement flash up from CCHQ, which is Conservative Central Office, saying, congratulations, Chris Grayling has been appointed Conservative Party chairman. It's like, well, I'm clearly not getting that then.
Oh my word!
Only for this, of course, to be a complete blunder. I've never really kind of understood how this ended up happening. But CCHQ have put out the wrong party chairman, and that got taken down very quickly. And then, 10 minutes later, a slightly confused Brandon Lewis has been offered the party chairman job. It's, well, hold on a minute. And I looked up botched reshuffle because I knew we were going to be talking about this, obviously, to remind myself about this. And the day after this, quite sort of, by today's standards, relatively decent reshuffle, but at the time it was, like I say, widely reported as a botched reshuffle. Brandon had to go on the media round the next morning to fly the flag for our well-oiled reshuffle. And he was asked whether the Tory party was in a mess, and he said, not quite.
Not quite.
That was
that the
later,
official?
obviously.
Was that the official line?
No, I don't think that was the official line.
It's a very rare mistake from him, isn't it? On a media
indeed,
round.
he is a brilliant media communicator, but not quite kind of summed it up, I think. And when you think about what happened to the Conservative Party post 2018, this looks like the sort of halcyon glory days of reshuffles.
Is it awful as an advisor or a reshuffle day because there's just so many moving parts? There's a whole kind of communication thing to get right. I don't know. For me, it feels like there must just be pressure from all sorts of very big personalities that you have to just juggle and balance and get right. And I don't know that's part of the art. I get that, but I just wonder if it's stressful or how.
Well, the media play a role in that for sure, Calum. My phone. My phone is completely blowing up because a lot of lobby journalists do have very close relationships with secretaries of state, ministers, departments, and have their own sources, and they are. Absolutely, they're just chucking names at you, just kind of because they're hearing all different things, and they're just chucking, countless different names at you in countless different departments, wanting, like, is this happening? Well, I've heard so and so, I've heard X, I've heard Y, and then so there's that circus going on. Then there's actually a circus going on internally as well. So you're just absolutely trying to kind of push back the tide of just mess.
And that media thing is happening outside as well.
Exactly.
So when you're stood on Downing Street or wherever, and there's a whole group of journalists, the messages go back and forth between journalists. Well, I'm hearing this. What have you heard? One of my favourite things to do is if somebody is rushed up the street in a car and they kind of pile out straight in the door of Downing Street. You've literally seen the back of their head. Some people have distinctive backs of heads. Wendy Morton. Excuse me. I was about to correct myself. That is actually her real name. I was about to use the very disparaging nickname for her, which I'm not going to lower myself and do. That is her correct name. I can't remember now. But she was, of course, the chief whip. She has a very distinctive hairstyle, as does Jake Berry. He doesn't have any hair. And so you recognise these people. But otherwise, you then scramble over to the photographers who have been pointing their cameras at the door and in the car window. Who was that? Did you catch who that was? And so everyone's hustling outside as well, trying to get information and get insight. It's interesting to hear that there's, equally as large a circus going on the other side of the door as well.
I think my experience was quite potentially unique in the sense that we were, when you're trying to arrange a cabinet amongst mass resignations, you're almost just trying to find the numbers.
Who was
like the game of chess becomes less about, are they right for that job, or, is that going to annoy so-and-so? It's more kind of, can we actually just get someone to do it? And that's when, obviously, a government...
You were nearly Foreign Secretary, weren't you, Oscar, at one point?
You have no idea how many smarmy journalists made that same joke on the day,
sorry.
Calum.
Oh, no, I don't want to be like, sorry.
No, it's all good. I've processed it now. It's all fine. But no, so that then feels completely... I think, rearranging chairs on the Titanic, really. We nearly got there, though.
Yeah.
I wasn't close enough to know... So this is unfortunate for your listeners, in a way. But so I genuinely wasn't quite close enough to the process to know the exact details of it, but we got very close to getting a legitimate,
functioning government.
Well, a just about legitimate cabinet together that would have, I think, potentially bought Boris more time. And
but the cleaner walking down Downing Street you dragged in didn't want to do the job either, so that was that. Right?
We got very close. It really was the 11th hour. It really was, but it just couldn't quite make it
Amazing
happen.
to hear. And Kirsty, do you consider that 2018 reshuffle a success, despite the difficulty in getting through it with Justine Greening staging assistant, etc.?
I think it was indicative of the time and indicative of our weak position. All reshuffles do is, again, drain your goodwill, drain your kind of power bucket, if you like. So, people end up on the back benches again. You've created enemies. Sometimes people are, have hopes that they'll get a promotion to a certain post and they're disappointed that they haven't. So, I'm trying to think of a reshuffle recently where people went, do you know what? That reshuffle was absolutely brilliant and it went really well. I just can't remember them. Tony Blair's, I can remember a couple of Tony Blair's were kind of heavily criticised. I mean, not by today's standards, obviously, but, were heavily criticised and, people don't want to move in stage sit-ins and, people walk out, etc. They don't, because people are human, politicians are human, they get disappointed, they get upset, and all you've done is create, you may have made, a few friends along the way, but you'll have created a whole bunch of other people that have ended up back on the back benches again. So, look, I think, and if you're in a strong position as a Prime Minister, you can afford that. If you're in a weak position, you can't. I mean, just to kind of put it in perspective on the reshuffle that Liz Truss conducted when she became Prime Minister, which
all those years ago, way back when
you
can hardly remember.
I was about to say when it was still warm, but it's probably about as warm as it still is.
Yeah,
she again, I think, ill-advised in the sort of level and the scale of the cull, because they behaved as if they had earned the 80-seat majority that they had simply inherited. They kind of crossed the road to make a lot of unnecessary enemies. And in a Conservative parliamentary party of 356 MPs, just to put this in perspective, by the end of 12 years in office, on the back benches after Liz Truss reshuffle, there were 119 former ministers sat there. Now, a lot of these ministers will think, well, that's it for me. I'm never getting back into, government again. And, what's in it for me to be disciplined? What's in it for me to take one for the team? Because I'm not getting up going up the career ladder anymore. I'm on the way out and down. And now I need to look after my seat and, do what my constituents want me to do rather than what the Prime Minister wants me to do. So it is a power struggle and a power play. And you can, if you overtip it, it can become problematic.
And the job gets harder and harder now for the government because they have been in power for so long. There are, the Conservative Party is a really broad church as it is in terms of interests and style of Tory politician. But on top of that, another layer is there have just been so many cabinets formed over the years. There's so much baggage there, and that's just a whole new layer. That each time you form a cabinet, there are more people. You kind of have more decisions and less at the same time. That might not be a very articulate way of putting it, but it does become more difficult. And actually, it gets to the point, and I think the public would look at what's gone on over the last period of time, and it looks almost farcical because you have people who have been secretaries of state for a matter of days, and whilst. So you get into a situation where you go, well, who actually would be, just take the politics out of it as much as you can, who would actually be the best education secretary or, the best home secretary? I mean, I think a lot of normal people who get bored of the political kind of merry-go-round, that's how I think most people believe a government should be formed. Just who's going to be the best person to do that job. And it's really disappointing to have to tell listeners that, we just had this whole conversation that actually, in terms of criterion, is quite low down, I would say, in terms of how they are eventually formed, which probably isn't right. But
that is the insight. That is the insight that we like and that we are into on Whitehall Sources. A really, really fascinating understanding there then of how a reshuffle works. Perhaps where Suella Braverman's particular appointment may still cause problems as well. Lots to consider then on this week's podcast. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Oscar. Lovely to speak to you both. And hopefully, famous last words, but hopefully things have calmed down a little. I think I've said this at the end of every episode.
Yeah, leave us alone, Calum.
Honestly, these poor guys, I pop up in the WhatsApp group chat basically every day. When can we do the next one? Are you guys available today? How about today? In an hour's time? Anyway, there we are. Thank you. That's lovely. That's what you get on Whitehall Sources. Insight from those who have advised actual Prime Ministers on all of these things that you may be familiar with at a surface level in the news, but this gets you behind the door of number 10. Make sure you follow and subscribe, press the button, make sure you're here for next week's episode as well, because we can't wait to speak to you then. And in the meantime, email your thoughts, your predictions, what might happen, what might not happen, your analysis as well. Anytime, we will feed that in. You can email hello@whitehallsources.com. That just brings us then to the correspondence unit. We've just got a couple of minutes for this week. Basically, I want to read through some of Kirsty's fans, basically the fan mail on TikTok is my plan for the correspondence unit this week. Let's open the doors. Let's have a little look. I'm going to just jump into, Kirsty's latest viral success, which is, as I click into TikTok, still going even more viral. It's astonishing. Here we are. Lots of comments on here. This was about Rishi Sunak. He didn't want to have his name in the media. He just wanted to get on with the job. Naima on TikTok says, well done to this brilliant lad. He's going to be a brilliant Prime Minister of this country. Craig says, I don't have much faith in politics, but hey, good luck to him, and hopefully he might do some good for the UK. This is what I mean by this in particular seems to have instilled some sense of stability and optimism this week. Maybe even people on here who dislike his policies are kind of saying, for example, Kay, I really hope he succeeds. We need to stop attacking him before we see his actions and give him a chance, which I think is interesting. YG on TikTok, great to hear something so positive and good about the new PM. And this person says, I wonder whose silly advice he took to appoint Braverman. No one's biting that one.
I was just going to say, what's an interesting theme that's getting picked up there is actually people just want a normal government for a bit. Yes. And actually Rishi, and the reason I say it, because it's not a particularly interesting point to make, but the reason I said that is I thought the Times front page today, I almost had to sit down because it was about kind of education reform and it was like policy and ideas. And it just felt like for a moment, normal issues and politics were on the front pages again. And that's what his success will be. And I think that's what a lot of people who aren't just party political will want and hope. And actually how he'll judge his success, I think over the next few months, will be keeping politics off the front pages.
Well, can I leave you with this thought then? Assuming that Braverman, as we think potentially the kind of momentum goes out of the current controversy and Braverman continues as Home Secretary, there is coming down the pipe really quickly a looming flashpoint between Braverman and the Prime Minister in any event. And it was part and parcel, I understand, of the row that Braverman had with Liz Truss, which was around immigration. Now, Liz Truss wanted to have more education and study visas and work visas for Indian incomers as part of the trade deal, the free trade deal that Britain is hoping to secure with the Indian government right now. This is a massive, massive trade deal. It will be worth something like 100 billion by the end of the decade. It will be doubling what our trade is with India at the moment. And she hoped, and obviously you can understand why Liz Truss was very keen on getting this over the line. And you therefore can understand her dismay when Braverman, I think unprompted, said that she had great reservations about relaxing visa restrictions around sort of study visas and work visas for Indian people, and that she had wider reservations about relaxing immigration per se, and wanted to bring the target back to that much discussed and unloved policy of tens of thousands cap. So at the very time that Liz Truss was trying to drive home this Brexit dividend big trade deal with India, Braverman was sort of putting the torpedo tubes under it. That deal is still on the table. There is still obviously a hope, a very strong hope from the new Prime Minister that can get signed and sealed very quickly. But with Braverman as Home Secretary, this is going to cause the Prime Minister a real problem because, unless she's had some sort of Damascene conversion in the last week, she's still going to be very resistant to what it is that the Indian government is asking for to get this massive bilateral trade deal over the line. So they might yet fall foul of each other in any event, even if the current troubles subside.
And we will be here to analyse every single bit of it. You will be pleased to hear. Thank you for being with us on Whitehall Sources this week. Subscribe and follow. Tell your friends. Leave us a little review if you've got a couple of minutes as well. That would be lovely. And you can email anytime and we will feature you in the correspondence unit when we open the doors on our next episode. Email hello@whitehallsources.com. And until then, goodbye.